Well, hello, Julian. You're the only guest to appear 3 times, so we're absolutely thrilled to have you back. What do you want to talk about today? Have you got another thing that you want to air?
I have indeed got another thing, and great to be back, Sharon. Thank you for inviting me. What I would like to talk about is fungi, in particular, the decline in knowledge and understanding of fungi within arboriculture. Now, this may well seem a surprising thing, given the recent publication by the Arboricultural Association of their two very excellent books, Fungi on Trees and Fungi and Trees, both of which I have bought and absolutely love. So well done to the Arbor Association for doing that. Um, there seems to be a lot of information out there, but for some reason, it is not cutting through. This is because over the last 6 to 12 months, we are seeing increasing numbers of clients coming to us to peer review reports by other arboricultural consultants where they are concerned about the treatment of fungi within those reports. This will include tree surveys where a tree is identified as having fungus on it with no further information being given. It will include cases where tree surveys have been submitted for planning purposes and a sharp-eyed tree officer has spotted a multi-year fungal fruit body that's not been picked up in the tree survey.
Wow, that's really worrying.
Yeah. Um, we also get quite a few referrals from other arboricultural consultants on veteran tree matters. So for this route as well, we end up seeing other people's surveys, and there are a number of occasions when fungi are treated really very inadequately by those surveys. And the third sort of source of our insight into this topic is when we take on cases at appeal. I'm talking about development related appeals going to inquiry, so high level stuff, where there's been a planning application with a tree survey at first instance. So then if it's refused, the developer will often go to a specialist appeal witness such as myself. We'll then have a look at the survey. We'll usually repeat it because we prefer to go into bat with our own data, as you'd understand. And the number of times again we find fungi have been missed or misidentified, or their significance is not understood, or a whole range of things. And it's happening sufficiently often as to becoming now a very significant cause for concern.
So, do you see this as a trend of getting worse? I mean, obviously, you've been in the industry a while, Julian, as have I. I mean, I remember when I was doing my tech cert about 20 odd years ago, it was so exciting to look at fungi, and people were going around with big brackets under their arm, and people say, "Oh, I've got fungi envy," and it was like the sexiest topic out there. What's happened?
You know, it absolutely was. I had the same experience, like many in the industry. I got my learning on the job with Dave Dowson and Tree Life, and you know his transformative path that he has given so many of us is
Absolutely.
really valuable, and that's really what introduced me to the identification process of fungi. And it was essential in those days, the management exercise in the professional diploma. As you may well know, we had this identificatory element, both of woody plants and of pests and diseases of woody plants. And I set myself the goal of knowing all of them, which is quite a tall order. But I really drilled that stuff, and I've never worked so hard to learn anything in my life. I certainly never worked for my O levels or A levels, to my shame. Didn't work as hard as I should have done for my degree, to be honest with you. But the fungi, I absolutely packed that stuff in.
And I actually wrote their names on post-it notes and put them on the kitchen cupboards. So when I was cooking dinner, I'd think, oh, Inonotus hispidus. Oh,
Yeah,
and you know, and,
absolutely.
and and that would help me learn. And I'd think of funny ways to say them because I found it very daunting to have this long Latin name.
That's what I did. So I used to put mine in into the rather beautiful Scottish lilt of Peter Capaldi,
Oh
if you know the
yes,
accent. He's absolutely
yes.
marvelous. You can do his voice for fungi. Daedaleopsis confragosa, for example, it just spells out the phoneticism of the Latin name beautifully. So I had exactly the same experience as you. But this is waning now. This is going. And I work with people who've done the more modern professional diploma, who have very, very weak fungicide knowledge. I do a lot of work with the excellent Ben Abbott, who you will know, who is a freelance Lanta instructor and certification certificate issuer, and he says that Lanta and Lanta PTI has very, very small element of fungal identification. I mean, recognizing there is a fungus is a start. And he and I have been working together on a number of occasions to try and increase people's knowledge of fungi. We did a seminar recently for the consultancy ArbTech, who are very forward thinking in terms of CPD. In fact, they have unlimited CPD for their staff, which is astonishing to me.
That's wonderful.
And they sent a dozen or so people, both ecologists and arboriculturists, on a 2-day seminar that Ben and I ran in the New Forest recently, from where I spoke to you, in fact, at the time, where we discussed this. And they came out of that process, obviously with much more information they went in, which was the purpose of it. But the question is, why are people practicing as arboriculturists not being given this information? It is a real concern. And the reason it matters, of course, is because you might kill somebody. If you have a severely decayed tree and you don't understand the implications of that or what's decaying it. But also in the development site context, you could well misgrade a tree. You may well think, well, that's an absolutely fantastic looking lime tree. Yeah, but what about the Kretschmeria all around the base?
Scary.
Yeah, exactly. So these things really do matter. And I'd like to share a story with you that underlines the importance of this. When I first started working as a full-time consultant, the main tool of my day job was BS 5837, and I think the date was something from the Elizabethan period, the first Elizabethan period. It's very, very old. Apocryphally, a document written over a long weekend by Giles Biddle. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard. And it was fine in its day, but it was woefully out of date by the time we were in the early noughties. And so I started nagging British Standards Institution to do something about it and asked them, what does it take to get a standard revised? And they said, well, there isn't a chairman of the oversight committee, and this is the role that I now occupy some years later, but there wasn't a chairman at the time, so you need a chairman. So I thought, well, okay, I'll suggest Colin Bashford. He was a fairly obvious choice, some standing in the industry, God rest his soul. So Julie said he would chair the committee B213. And then we needed somebody to run the drafting group, and Colin and I had a chat, and Richard Nicholson was the obvious choice. So he was approached, and he said that he would do that, so that was great. And then a dozen or so of us formed up to start rewriting BS 5837 into what would become 5837 2005. And we had a meeting. He said, well, who's going to do what? And I said, well, I'd like to deal with a bit about the tree survey, and I'd like to deal with a bit about demolition and construction near to trees. These are two things that I feel strongly about. I'll do those. Okay, well, you do those, Julian, that's fine. Next meeting, I come in with my shiny new draft of the tree survey clause, and I'd made quite a few changes. And one of the changes I'd made is I'd inserted 3 words into it in terms of the tree survey. So it used to say a tree survey shall be undertaken recording details of the trees and so on. And I inserted the words by an arboriculturist. A tree survey shall be undertaken by an arboriculturist.
Can I just say those 3 words led to a massive growth in the arboricultural industry?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the words that effectively changed everything really for us. They got us a seat under the table, and membership of design team meetings that we simply couldn't get into before. But anyway, so I proposed this change, and there was a member there who was representing the Landscape Institute, and he sucked his teeth. He said, see, we do all the tree surveys, and be really reluctant to agree to that change because, I've got my members to think about. And he was fighting his corner, I was fighting mine, perfectly respectable and fair. But he sort of resisted that change. So we had some toing and froing in the meeting, and in the end, it was agreed that the next meeting would settle it. And if we couldn't agree, we'd stay with what we had. So I duly arrived for the next meeting, late, having been stuck in traffic in Chiswick. Everybody else was there. I walked into the room. And I have to say, I wasn't in a great mood as a result of the traffic. And I had in my hand a piece of bark from a lime tree with Kretschmeria fruit bodies on it. And I walked up to my colleague's place around this table, and I put it down fairly hard on the desk in front of him and said, right, what's that? And he looked at it, And he was a bright guy, and he knew what I was saying, and he said, okay, tree survey can be undertaken by an arboriculturist.
So finally, we have something to thank Kreutzmacher for.
Yes, indeed. But the point, of course, is that the kickstart that gave the profession was based not on our knowledge of trees, but on our knowledge of fungi.
I like it.
And we are the tree people who also know about fungi. And if we lose that knowledge, we lose that chunk of our specialism and our legitimacy. At which point, hey, the landscape architects can go on a VTA course and they can do the tree surveys. Do we want that? I'm not sure we do. I think we know a bit more than that. But let's make sure we absolutely keep this knowledge up to date so that we can always keep that seat at the table, particularly with regarding development work, which of course is the main work stream for most of us. I have no doubt. Certainly it is for me. Because of that importance, the decline I'm seeing in the ability to identify and understand fungi on trees is really worrying.
It's really worrying, not only because, as you said earlier, somebody might die or property might be damaged from either missing or misidentifying a fungus, but equally, somebody could identify a fungus. Let's say they identify Laetoporus sulphureus, but they don't really know. They just see a fungus and it's that fungus, or Fistulina hepatica. Let's say they see a lovely oak tree approaching veteran status. It's got beefsteak fungus at the base. They might see fungus fell.
Yes.
We know that we don't need to fell that tree. So
Exactly.
It could lead to loss of heritage, loss of important landmark trees. So there are many implications of arboriculturists not being able to identify fungi. And sometimes it's hard, Julian. You know, obviously if it's an annual fungus and you're left with
squishy mess.
Coleopsis, squishy mess. Yeah, I was going to say Coleopsis viscularis, a squishy mess on the ground, and you're not absolutely sure what it can be. Equally, if it's very covered in sort of slime or algae, it's not. And we can cut into it and have a look at the section, but it's not easy.
No, it's not. It's not easy.
Sometimes you can just go, well, I know that that's Kreutzmacher, or I know that that's Ganoderma resinaceum because it's kind of shiny. But it's all too easy to think, oh, I think it's that will do. But the implication of that is terrible.
And actually, in this regard, all credit, I have to give it another plug to the AA's book,
Yes,
Fungi on Trees, because that does show fruit bodies in different stages of decay and decomposition. And that really does help. But of course, if you have a good knowledge of fungi, you know which species occur on which trees, or conversely, if you have a good knowledge of trees, you know which species of fungi occur on them. So if you have an oak tree with a squishy mess at the base, you already know you can narrow it down to just a fairly few of the annual fungi you'd find on oak, maybe 3.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get down to that number, suddenly you're not starting with a long list of 40. We just got 3. And you can look at the time of year, and maybe that knocks it down to 2. And suddenly you've got one or the other. And it makes it that much easier. But you need that, what I call in your head knowledge.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. I don't think it's the knowledge that you get when you go back and you open the reference books, which we all do to clear up uncertainties.
Yes.
We all should do. And it's certainly not the knowledge you get when you open an app, which is, if you like, a replacement, a substitute for that. And of course, it doesn't replace it or substitute it. It, in some ways, it masquerades as knowledge, which you don't actually attain yourself. And I think this is possibly one of the reasons why people might be neglecting the acquiring of in-your-head knowledge, because they can think, I've got an app for that.
This is a really broad point that I think that the way that people are thinking and learning in the last 10 years has really changed. I think that people's attention span is smaller. I think they pretty much proved that. And the fact that you can ask Alexa, other things are available, a question and just get the answer. Whereas I'm old enough, and I don't suggest we go back to this, to have to walk to a library and get a book out to learn something. We've got the glory of the internet, but don't let that be a substitute.
Yes, exactly.
For your own in-your-head knowledge.
Exactly. So what I would promote is a hybridized information system, where we use the modern tools at our disposal to access the information, and yet we're not lazy. We don't subcontract our brains out. and we still
Yes.
get that in your head knowledge, so that as you see the squishy mess at the base of the oak tree, you already have an understanding of what it may well be. And even
Yes.
if you can't get it to the exact, because it simply would require microscopic analysis, although you may well do so. I have a microscope, and that can be helpful too. You can narrow it down, and you can have a much better understanding of what you're looking at. And you're absolutely right. We've moved from fungus tree bad to fungus tree interesting. Potentially
Yes.
also bad, but certainly interesting. And this is something that's coming through increasingly strongly in the planning system. I'm very fortunate to be called as an expert witness, public inquiry for veteran tree appeals. I have done 7 now, with 2 decisions pending. And does my side win every time? No. But what is being successful every time is the approach to the identification and management of veteran trees. And that's more important than whether or not the planning permission gets allowed in the long
Yes.
run.
Yes.
Because what we're building now is a body of appeal decisions that identify, if you like, a model way of handling this information. And I do have I must be careful because it's a pending decision, but one particular side had veteran oak trees on it, which had Ganoderma lucidum on one and Ganoderma resinaceum on the other. And I'm a great believer in finding out what other disciplines know about matters within our purview. And it was with this in mind that I spoke to a mycologist a couple of years ago, a chap called Nev Kilkenny. Hello, Nev, if you're listening to this. I asked him to point me in the right direction of information that I could use to help identify very long-established woodland, perhaps, and populations of old-growth trees. And the Joint Nature Conservancy Council, which I'm sure you've heard, this is the body that publishes the site selection criteria for biological SSSIs. I didn't know that, but they do. And chapter 14 of this ongoing work that they have is non-lichenized fungi. And in that chapter 14 of non-lichenized fungi, there are then lists of tables of fungi of higher conservation significance.
Oh, yes, that's right. Because some are on the red data list, aren't they?
Yes. Well, we've got one, which is the Schedule 8 Wildlife and Countryside Act species, Piptoporus quercinus, also known as Buglossoporus quercinus. But there are others which simply have higher conservation significance than, shall we say, ordinary fungi. And if you have lots of these present, the scoring system within the SSSI site selection guidelines guides you towards saying it's a candidate SSSI for mycological interest. Table 8 of this has fungi on oak trees, including Ganoderma lucidum and Ganoderma resinaceum. It also has the 3 oak brown rot fungi of maize gill, beefsteak, and chicken of the woods. But these 2 Ganodermas, they are afforded a mention in this SSSI site selection criteria. So when I was dealing with this appeal, say decision pending, so have to be a little bit careful, I drew attention to these fungi on these oaks and how the land use around the oaks was going to be treated to maximize the benefit of this mycodiversity and so forth. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing how the inspector treats that information. But the point is, I couldn't have done that if I didn't know what I was looking at and if I didn't have an understanding of its conservation significance.
In case listeners want to get a hold of that table, because I certainly do, would you send a link so when I post on LinkedIn about this podcast, people will be able to follow it?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
So what's happening? Are people lazier? Is there a problem with how people are trained? Because I don't see there's a lack of courses, because I remember during the lockdown, or certainly during the pandemic, the Arboricultural Association had a brilliant international fungi couple of days workshop. They've got the 2 books out. Fungus generally is a really interesting topic. We've had Entangled Life, the hugely successful book by Merlin Sheldrake, who's been a bestseller. I mean, that goes well beyond trees and fungi.
Yes.
But people are really understanding the multiple uses of fungi, anything from psychedelic treatment for mental health, mind expanding experiences, through to replacing plastic packaging with mycorrhizae sheets, through to making fake leather clothes with mycorrhizae, mopping up nuclear waste and oil spills. So, in terms of the general public's appetite for understanding what fungi can do, and that it is this incredible world, possibly the most interesting world, what's happening to us who should really know?
There must be a role for the education system that's producing arboriculturists. There must be. I'm guessing there is a gap there. Perhaps people are not coming out of college with good fungicide end. Because it's no longer a requirement in the acquisition of professional credentials the way it used to be. Maybe people are treating it as a nice to have rather than as a need to have. Maybe people attend a seminar or a webinar on some of the topics you've just run through without actually getting to grips with the detail of those fungi that really matter on trees. And when I work with Ben lecturing on these, Ben Abbott lecturing on these things, Ben worked through in particular the Arborist Field Guide that the Arbor Association produced, the 30 odd species in there. Extremely valuable, very simple, very accessible. And I would say you've got to be able to get your head around those. In addition to which, there are fungi of conservation significance, which I think is really important for arboriculturists at the higher end to know, because you can then start using that information to help you confirm mycodiversity of a tree or a tree population and start drawing attention to this. We have I'm going to plug this a little bit during this talk, but that's not why I'm talking to you. In fact, the thing I'm about to plug is a response to the problem rather than anything else. So we've got a 3-day seminar coming up in June, which I've posted about on LinkedIn. And that is fungi and veteran trees in the planning system, where we're looking in detail at precisely these issues. So it's ident training on potentially hazardous fungi, but also looking at fungi of conservation significance. And how do you work that information into preparing veteran tree management and succession plans, which are really hot topic now on large development sites. If you've got a veteran tree population, it's no longer a question of are you going to retain them, because of course you are. It's how you're going to treat the land use around them and how you're going to build up a millennial scale succession plan for those trees. And it can make a vast amount of difference. We've got an appeal decision, appeal called Ash Manor, and the inspector gave great weight to the veteran tree management and succession plan that we produced, because we had a population of oak polypore on the site. First time in that county it had been recorded. So really important to start getting this information in front of other decision makers so they can start recognizing it. My colleagues in ecology, they don't appear to be dealing with this issue. So, for example, they will do a grassland survey looking at diversity of grassland species from a purely botanical or higher plant point of view. They won't necessarily consider doing a sort of June and July survey in grasslands looking for Thermophilus boletes, a significant presence of which can again indicate a triple SI candidate site. It's not something that ecology seems to be picking up as well. So for this reason, our forthcoming seminar is aimed at ecologists as well as arboriculturists, because we're touching on these issues and the related aspects of saproxylic invertebrates, which of course you'll know about as a fellow veteran tree specialist. But the more you look into these relationships between fungi and trees, the more you find that the invertebrates, saproxylic invertebrates, come into play in that area as well. Stag beetles, for example, only on decayed wood. So the habitat is decayed wood. It's wood that's already been myco-remediated to the extent. The orchard tooth fungus, very, very rare fungus, that is absolutely key for vectoring in decay that noble chafer uses to build its habitat in the heartwood of old apple trees. There's 2 or 3 fungi active in old orchards, but orchard tooth fungus is one of them. Again, very, very unusual niche information that most people are not aware of. So in old orchards, one of the things you want is you want that decay, because that's what's altering the
Yes.
wood so the noble chafer larvae can feed on it.
How fascinating. I mean, I love this topic, and all the arboriculturists that I know love it too. So let's hope that we can reignite fun in fungal learning, because
Well,
I,
that's
I
very good.
think it has to be done. Let's hope that we can reignite the fun in fungi, because I know that it can seem really daunting as a new subject if you're a student in arboriculture and you're having to learn. Maybe you've never studied Latin at school. I certainly hadn't. And then you've got to learn all the trees, and then, oh, crumbs, got to learn all the fungi. But I think there's nothing like going out with somebody who knows what they're talking about, touching, smelling, holding, and seeing the different tree species and the different habitats that these fungi inhabit is the best way to learn. And I know it's daunting, but you just have to get yourself out there and get your fungi eyes.
Yes, yeah,
You,
exactly. So the seminar we ran, the 2-day seminar we ran in the New Forest, which is where we're going back to in June. The one we did in November, it was great. We had a sort of wood pasture walk over in a large country estate, private estate, but they kindly granted us access, and their head gardener came out with us as well. So we were able to show her some of the things she had growing on her trees, and actually she already had great fungal knowledge, which was just so good to see.
yeah,
She said, well,
brilliant.
there's hen of the woods on an oak up here, come and have a look. Absolutely brilliant, really, really good.
Yeah.
And then the following day we did a walkabout at a forestry commission site, and we found 19 across those 2 days, 19 of the 30 odd species in the Arbor Association field guide as
How wonderful.
live specimens in the field. And we had most of them anyway as dried specimens, but or recently harvested specimens. But finding them in the field was absolutely brilliant. Now you can't always do that because it is the luck of the draw, no question about it. But this is at the root of I think of the root of the training. We had 4 or 5 different examples of many species in different stages of growth, from juveniles through to squishy messes, and people getting familiar with that and comfortable with identifying them really does transform the knowledge. Just the process that I went through with Dave Dowson, dear God, a quarter of a century ago, really, really valuable to do this. And I think that possibly is what's missing. Photographs, seminars, when you're not actually in the field, apps, they won't do it. You need to be out there looking at them, and to start building up the confidence to be able to identify fungi for yourself. Oh, I don't know what that is. It could be anything. Actually, no, it can't, because you're on a pine tree. So that drops it down to what, 4 species probably. Suddenly, it can't be anything. There's only a few. And then you can look at the time of year, morphology, and state of growth or decomposition. Before you know where you are, it's this or that.
Excellent. Well, I absolutely agree with you. And I do hope that this inspires people to go out with each other. Arbs go out with other arbs, somebody who knows about fungi, and explore the outside world and see what you can see.
Finally, just to say, I use this knowledge, post-agent knowledge, to really avoid the need for significant decay investigation. I almost never do this. And increasingly, I'm seeing arboriculturists who are
Yes.
more and more tech reliant. And again, I just wonder if that's a substitute for in your head knowledge. And I've got a case that's hopefully is at rest now and is not going to go any further. And I can't go into any details, but somebody used a if you like, decay mapping tool on a tree, whereas I wouldn't have done. I would have just followed what I call my golden rule, which is extremely simple. And that is this: if the tree has significant decay, I stress if it has significant decay, and if it is located so as to be a hazard. Those are the prerequisites for the golden rule. If it's healthy, prune it. If it isn't, fell it, or at least reduce it to a stable structure. And I don't need to know the exact extent of decay to reach the management decision that is appropriate for almost all the trees I see. If you follow that golden rule, and if you understand fungi and decay in trees, if you have those 2 things in place, You don't really need anything else. And in this particular case, unfortunately, maybe that knowledge wasn't quite where it might have been, and a device was used and a conclusion was drawn that potentially had an adverse effect. And so I don't think there's a substitute for in your head knowledge. So I think arboriculture needs to not forget about fungi and the importance of identifying them. And hence, come along to our seminar in June. Just drop me an email. I'm easily findable on the net. Message me through LinkedIn or whatever. But if you don't do it through me, do it through somebody else and get some training.
And go out and have fun. Julian, as always, an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And thank you so much for your time.
Lovely. And thanks very much for having